Hey there, welcome to Health and Wealth Explorer. If you're someone with a desire to improve your life by improving your health and fitness, but you struggle a little bit when it comes down to the part of actually taking action, then I think today's video is going to be a big benefit for you. My name's Wade, and today I'm going to revisit an article that I wrote for the website just a few months ago that focused on the top 3 health issues in America. And I'm really focusing on these today because I think these are the top 3 health issues in America that we have the ability to affect and avoid. So if you have a hard time eating healthy, exercising, and staying active, then I think this video will give you the motivation you need to start taking action today. I don't think it will be a big surprise to hear that many Americans are suffering with some serious health issues these days, considering we're living increasingly sedentary lifestyles. We spend way too much time staring at screens, and most Americans are eating the standard American diet with the appropriate acronym of SAD. All of this has consequences, but I don't think people realize just how severe those consequences can be. If you think you already know what these 3 health issues are, then go ahead and leave it in the comments and we can check back later and see if you were right. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. One last thing before we dive in. I'll put a link in the description to our 4-step plan to improve health. This is a short and simple but powerful framework that we've put together to help you take action and take control of your health. So when we get to the end of this video and you're looking for some next steps, this is a great place to start, so check it out. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So first up we have obesity. All you have to do is go out in public and look around and it becomes pretty obvious that America has a weight problem, or more specifically, an overweight problem. And just in case you don't believe your own eyes, I do have some statistics here to share to really drive the point home. Looking at some fairly recent data from the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics, the average weight for adult men in the US is about 200 pounds, and the average weight for adult women in the US is about 170 pounds. With those numbers, the average woman today now weighs about the same as the average man weighed just 30 years ago. As far as I know, and I haven't seen anything, but as far as I know, there hasn't been a dramatic increase in average height to account for this increase in average weight. So, people aren't getting bigger, they're just getting bigger, and that's a problem. Taking a look at some additional statistics from the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics, 42.5% of US adults have obesity. And then 9 of those have severe obesity. And then on top of that, you have another 31.1% of US adults who are considered overweight. That puts the total number of US adults who are either obese or overweight at 73.6%. So nearly 3 out of every 4 Americans is either overweight or obese. Those are definitely some hefty numbers. But seriously, this isn't a joke, and this puts the US near the top of the list of the world's most obese countries, and that is not a list you want to be near the top of. And unfortunately, America's obesity problem doesn't just apply to adults. Sadly, the obesity numbers for children are on the same negative trajectory. The CDC's National Center for Health Statistics puts the number of children and adolescents aged 2 through 19 who are obese at 19.3%, with 6.1% of those having severe obesity. And then again, on top of that, you have another 16.1% who are overweight. That puts the total number of US children and adolescents who are either obese or overweight at just a bit over 35%. It's not quite as bad as the situation with adults, but it is clearly not good. And the thing is, being overweight or obese isn't just about how much you weigh or how you look or how you move. Being overweight or obese puts you at a higher risk for a number of different chronic diseases and health issues like heart disease, cancer, mental illness, and diabetes. Speaking of diabetes, that's our number 2 issue. Before we take a look at the stats related to diabetes, let's take just a moment to talk about what diabetes actually is. I'll refer to my notes here. So diabetes is a chronic health condition involving a person's production of or sensitivity to the hormone insulin and how that affects the amount of sugar in the bloodstream. There are 2 main kinds of diabetes that you've probably heard of, and they are creatively named type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes is believed to be caused by an autoimmune condition that causes a person's body to stop producing insulin. Type 2 diabetes, on the other hand, occurs when a person's body becomes resistant to insulin and doesn't use it well. Type 2 diabetes develops over time and is primarily believed to be caused by lifestyle factors. But in either case, whether type 1 or type 2, the person's issues with insulin causes a buildup of sugar in the bloodstream. The vast majority of people in America who have diabetes, that's like 90%, have type 2 diabetes. So when we talk about the diabetes epidemic in America, we're talking about type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes because it developed over time and typically affected people once they had reached adulthood. But sadly, we can't even use that term anymore because these days, type 2 diabetes is even affecting children. Going back to the CDC, and this time looking at the National Diabetes Statistics Report, there are nearly 30 million people of all ages in the US, but almost entirely adults, who've been diagnosed with diabetes. So 30 million is definitely a big number, but it gets worse when you consider that there is an estimate of an additional 8 to 9 million people who have diabetes, but they just don't know it and haven't been officially diagnosed yet. That puts the total number of people in America who have diabetes at about 38 million, or roughly 12% of the population. That is very bad, but it actually gets worse. We also have to take into account prediabetes, which is a health condition where a person has blood sugar levels that are higher than normal, but they're not yet high enough to be diagnosed as type 2 diabetes. So essentially, a person who has prediabetes is, as the name suggests, on their way to developing type 2 diabetes. The CDC estimates that there are about 98 million people who have prediabetes, and out of that 98 million people, about 80% of them don't even know it. That's incredibly concerning when you take into account that having prediabetes doesn't just increase a person's chance of developing type 2 diabetes, it also increases a person's chance of developing other very serious health conditions like heart disease and stroke. So if you've been keeping track, and let me check my notes here, we have 38 million people with diabetes and 98 million people with prediabetes for a grand total of 136 million Americans with either diabetes or prediabetes. That's more than 40% of the US population. I mentioned a moment ago that roughly 30 million people who have been diagnosed with diabetes is made up almost entirely of adults. And that's true, but that doesn't mean that children don't have diabetes. Children and adolescents under 20 account for about 350,000 of those roughly 30 million cases of diagnosed diabetes. But in children, the vast majority, or 86%, have type 1 diabetes, with only 14% having type 2 diabetes, which is pretty much the opposite of what we see in adults, where 94% of the diabetes cases in adults are type 2 and just 6% are type 1. Unfortunately, the incidence of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes is increasing in children, and perhaps even more unfortunately, we're seeing a much steeper increase in the incidence of type 2 diabetes in children. Not surprisingly, the increase in childhood diabetes seems to be going hand in hand with the increase in childhood obesity that I mentioned earlier. And in fact, there seems to be a general overall correlation between obesity and diabetes, where when you look at those 30 million cases of diagnosed diabetes, roughly 90% of those people are also overweight or obese. So what's so concerning about diabetes? Well, not only is diabetes the 8th leading cause of death in America in its own right, but having diabetes can also lead to a number of other serious health conditions like heart disease, kidney disease, nerve damage, and vision loss. In fact, the CDC notes that diabetes is the leading cause of kidney failure, lower limb amputations, and adult blindness. It's scary stuff. But it's not as scary as our third and final issue, heart disease. You've probably heard heart disease referred to as the #1 killer in America, and it is in fact the leading cause of death for just about any group you can think of, whether it's men, women, different racial or ethnic groups, it's #1. So what exactly is heart disease? Heart disease is a sort of umbrella term that covers a number of different health conditions related to the heart. In the United States, coronary artery disease is the most common form of heart disease, and it accounts for more than half of the deaths that are attributed to heart disease. With coronary artery disease, plaque builds up in the arteries that supply blood to the heart, causing those arteries to narrow over time. This narrowing of the arteries can block the flow of blood to the heart either partially or completely, and when the heart doesn't get enough blood, then you can end up with a heart attack. Over time, coronary artery disease can weaken the heart and ultimately lead to heart failure. According to 2021 statistics from the CDC and the American Heart Association, one person dies of heart disease every 33 seconds, with 695,000 people dying from heart disease for that year, and that accounted for 1 in every 5 American deaths. With that in mind, about the last thing anybody needs is multiple paths to heart disease, but unfortunately, multiple paths to heart disease is exactly what we have. As I mentioned earlier, being overweight or obese can put a person at an increased risk for both diabetes and heart disease. Diabetes can also lead to the development of heart disease. And obesity and diabetes can also lead to high blood pressure or hypertension, which in turn can lead to heart disease. So obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are each bad in their own right, but they also seem to be intertwined in a number of ways. And they also share a number of the same risk factors like unhealthy eating and low physical activity. That's why I said at the beginning of this video that I think these are the 3 top health issues that we have the power to affect and avoid. So to wrap this up, these certainly aren't the only health issues that people face. I mean, we didn't even talk about things like cancer and mental health, which are certainly big issues these days. But if your goal is to lead a long and healthy life and have a high quality of life, then tackling these 3 issues seems to be a pretty good place to start. Take action and take control by making some relatively simple changes to things like your activity level and how you eat. Notice I said simple and not easy, because those don't always mean the same thing. Just because something is simple in concept doesn't mean that it will be easy to execute. But that's not an excuse. We understand that it might be hard, and we're here to help. Make sure you check out our other videos, and if you're ready to take action but you're not quite sure where to start, check out the 4-step plan to improve health that I linked to in the description and start there. Thank you, and we'll catch you next time.